coming. We're going to get started. Congressman Peters will join us shortly. And just so you know the order of speakers, Principal Del Carmen Aguilar will start, Congresswoman Davis, Superintendent Cindy Martin, Congressman Juan Vargas, Congressman Peters, our Board Vice President Richard Barrera, our board member Zachary Patterson, our first student elected board member to the Board of Education, our San Diego Education Association President Keisha Borden, our PTA President Mahogany Taylor, and finally Gabriel Wezzo from California School Employees Association. Let me introduce Principal Del Carmen Aguilar.
Thank you, Maureen. Good morning, everyone. I am Franny Del Carmen Aguilar. As the principal of San Diego High School, school opened in 1882, I am proud to welcome so many distinguished guests to our campus and for this important gathering. I am honored to introduce Congresswoman Susan Davis. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Principal Aguilar, and it is a pleasure for me to be here, and thank you all for joining us. You know, this is the first week of school for many of our local school districts. But instead of taking pictures of our kids and our grandkids as they are dropped off for their first day of school, we are sitting at dining room tables and logging in to our computers, navigating new applications in this return to distance learning. We all want our schools to be open again, but we also want them to be safe. Our schools are vulnerable for many different reasons. The CDC's most recent guidance acknowledges that children are capable of spreading the virus, and we have yet to learn what long-term health ramifications there are for children who have been exposed. It's not just our children. It's not just our children or their families that we want to protect. It is also the 1.5 million teachers in our country who are considered at higher risk for severe reaction to the coronavirus. So we are asking teachers to risk their own health to return to schools where what they can contract we know is far worse than the seasonal cold. Our state and local governments are facing unprecedented budget shortfalls to the tune of nearly $500 billion, which inevitably leads to deep cuts in education budgets. The House passed the HEROES Act over 100 days ago in order to address this need, while the Trump administration has instead pressured schools to reopen without safety measures in place, without the ventilation repairs that are necessary, and without the funding to bridge the gap in state budgets. So at this unsettling time, as members of Congress, we don't pretend to have all the answers, but we do know much more needs to be done. The pandemic has unfortunately only exacerbated the inequities that we all know plague our education system. So rather than pretending that there is nothing to be done, we call on the Senate to provide schools the resources they need to make it through this troubling time. We hope that they will decide to work with us. I want to thank our colleagues for being here today, and it's now my pleasure to turn over to Cindy Martin, the Superintendent of San Diego Unified School District, who within her job description now has to be finding enough PPEs for our teachers and staff and our children. Thank you again.
I want to say thank you to Congresswoman Davis for being here, and all of the congressional delegation here. Thank you, Congressman Vargas and Congressman Peters. Your collective presence here today underscores the urgency of this moment, and for this whole year, for that matter. 2020 has not been an easy year, by any means. We shifted to online learning in an effort to do our part to slow the spread of COVID-19. And during that time, as a district, we distributed 58,000 Chromebook computers and provided 4 million meals to our students who depend on school for food and nutrition. This pandemic has challenged us to close the digital divide, and that's what we're doing here in San Diego Unified. This pandemic has also challenged us to find ways to ensure that our students have access to school meals. So on this, I want to thank Congresswoman Davis and our entire delegation for engaging with the USDA to extend the necessary waivers that we needed so that we could continue to provide access to our school meals for our students who so desperately need it. And we look forward to working with you to continue our advocacy so that we can extend those waivers for the rest of the school year. Our goal continues to be to reopening all of our schools for all of our students. It's tremendously encouraging that the virus has receded enough so that we could start phase 1 of that effort. But sustaining phase 1 and future efforts to provide in-person instruction requires more funding. Additional funding is necessary so that we can ensure that we maintain our strict standards that we've put in place so that we can protect the health and the safety of all of our students, our staff, and the entire community. School districts need to purchase personal protective equipment for children and for adults. And we need to increase the cleaning and the daily health checks. And we have to modify our school buildings, including our classrooms, our gymnasiums, our auditoriums, our cafeterias, and our school buses, so that we can meet the social distancing guidelines and recommendations. We know that many children will return to school having experienced significant losses during these school closures. The average student may have fallen behind 7 months academically, while Black and Latino students could experience even more learning loss. This is why we asked the United States Senate and Senator Majority Leader Mitch McConnell to save our schools and pass the HEROES Act. And to underscore this point and help us in these advocacy efforts, we have a visual message to the United States Senate, which can be found on our school bus yard, an SOS signal of buses, which stands for Save Our Schools. Our message is clear. This is distance learning to Washington, D.C. Our message is clear. Please help us save our schools. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Congressman Juan Vargas. Thank you for being here.
Thank you very much, Superintendent. Appreciate your words and your leadership. I also want to thank very much my colleague, Susan Davis, who's always been there for kids, always been there for schools, has been a real champion, and we're going to miss you so much in Congress, but you've been a real champion for all of these schools. And I guess also my good friend, Scott Peters, who's here, and the rest of my friends and colleagues here. We're here to say, save our schools, and this can be done. All that the president has to do is quit pretending that this pandemic doesn't exist. It exists. We have the best students. We have the best teachers here in California. They want to teach and these kids want to learn, but they need a safe environment. In Congress, we passed a bill to be able to do that. We're asking the Senate, do your job. And we're asking the president, quit pretending that this pandemic doesn't exist. Don't just say send the kids to school. Don't worry if they get sick. They'll be fine because they're little. They go home to their parents, to their grandparents. They can get them sick to their teachers, to the people that work here in the schools. It doesn't have to be this way. We can do it safely. Yesterday, I took my daughter to get her molars taken out. I went to the dentist's office. They did it right. They have all these precautions. They can do an operation on a child safely. We certainly could teach them if we spend the money. If we spend the money. The state doesn't have the money. The school districts don't have the money. Only the federal government can do it. That's why we're asking the federal government to do it. We're asking the Senate to get off their butts and pass the bill, and we're asking the president to sign it. Estamos diciendo queremos abrir las escuelas porque sabemos que es muy importante, pero tenemos que abrirlos de un modo seguro para que los muchachos puedan regresar a las escuelas. Los maestros aquí son muy buenos, son excelentes, pero tenemos que tener un lugar seguro. No nomás pueden abrir así las escuelas como el presidente dice, nomás que abran las escuelas, que se enfermen los niños, son niños, no hay problema. Sí hay problema. Ellos se enferman, entonces enferman a sus padres, sus abuelos, a los maestros aquí, a los que trabajan aquí. Pero no tiene que ser de este modo. Podemos abrirlos de un modo seguro y podemos hacerlo, pero tenemos que gastar dinero en esto. El Estado no tiene el dinero, las escuelas no tienen el dinero. El gobierno federal sí lo tiene y tiene que hacerlo. Por eso le pedimos al Senado que haga su trabajo, al presidente que no nomás diga que abran las escuelas, que no piense que no está esta pandemia. Existe y se puede hacer. Él tiene que firmar esta ley. Muchísimas gracias y con eso voy a presentarles mi buen amigo Scott Peters. And with that, I want to introduce my good friend in Spanish, Scott Peters.
Thank you, Juan, and thank you to Susan for putting us together. Always our leader on education issues, as Juan said, and all the public officials here with us today. This pandemic has touched the lives of every American, but the interconnected world among children, families, and schools has faced particular challenges this year. Teachers and administrators have adapted lesson plans and teaching styles to suit online classes. Students have had to adjust to learning remotely as they lament the absence of seeing their friends every day at school, which is itself an important part of the education process. And many working parents are juggling their jobs to keep food on the table while also becoming an even bigger part of their kids' learning experience. This week is the first one back for many San Diego students, and while each school and school district's academic plan may look different, I wouldn't doubt they all took similar questions into account. Can students and teachers physically come back to the classroom? What kind of rules and tools are needed to protect staff and students to prevent the virus from spreading? What about hybrid-style courses with some learning done online and some spent together at school? What if there's an outbreak and things change again? Are we prepared? Then come the issues surrounding accessibility and equity. Does every child have access to a computer? Does each home have reliable internet service? And are parents able to ensure their child is doing their work, supplementing that teacher-student interaction? Next, we think about how families are being asked to step up to the plate under unprecedented strain. Those able to work from home now face endless hours of child supervision and assisted visual learning. For frontline workers, the balancing act of working during a pandemic and the irregular demands to spend extra time guiding your children through their studies is extraordinary and unprecedented. And many families are also going through the financial hardship due to mass unemployment. And on top of all this, we should check in with our children during this turbulent time to make sure they're doing okay and to support their mental and emotional well-being. Now, while education is primarily a state and local responsibility, as Juan so eloquently emphasized, Congress owes it to our constituents to make sure that schools, students, and parents have everything they need to ease these burdens. The federal government should help strengthen remote learning, support families, and fund the safe reopening of schools, and that's why over 100 days ago, the House passed the HEROES Act to provide schools the resources they need to cope. That's $90 billion to stabilize the public education system and help state agencies and school districts maintain current services, including preventing layoffs, too large class sizes, and cuts to academic programs and mental health services. Also, $1 trillion in state and local funding to prevent any slashes to public education with $58 billion in emergency funding for K-12 schools to cover unexpected costs crucial to reopening, like PPE, like cleaning, sanitizing supplies, and making accommodation for high-risk students and educators. So we're all here today to call on Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, President Trump, and Secretary DeVos, urging them to grant our students, schools, and families some relief. It's critical we provide the necessary tools and funding to continue educating our kids and safely reopen our schools. I want to thank everyone for being here. It's my pleasure now to introduce Board Vice President Richard Barrera.
Thank you, Representative Peters. You know, as we listen to our local representatives, Susan Davis, Juan Vargas, and Scott Peters, I'm struck by how clear our local representatives are in understanding what's actually happening here with our students, with our families, with our schools, and what a contrast that is to the total disconnect that we get from the Trump administration and from the Republicans in the United States Senate. We had to lobby them, especially with the leadership of Susan Davis, for months just to allow us to continue to feed our kids every day. And you'll see that operation going on here at San Diego High School today. And now we have been lobbying for months to help them understand that in order for our students to be back on our campuses where they have to be, we need to have the resources to keep our students and our adults safe on our campuses. This is a non-negotiable. We have said very clearly to Donald Trump, we will not open our schools until it is safe to do so. But in order for it to be safe to do so, there are a couple of things that need to happen. One, we need to get this virus under control. San Diegans have been doing a great job over the last several weeks of bringing the rates of the virus down, and we're encouraged by that. And because of that, we have started to move forward with our first phase of reopening, and we are ready to move forward with subsequent phases as hopefully this virus gets under control. And I can tell you as a school board member, it is incredibly frustrating to look at countries around the world and see kids going back to school safely because those governments did their job early on and got this virus under control. That's not the situation that we have in this country. And so that requires the second major ask of the federal government, which is you have to provide the resources we need to provide that personal protective equipment, to make sure we have nurses in every school, to make sure we have enough adult supervision to keep our students in small groupings, to make sure we can clean our schools every day, to make sure we have enough buses to keep our students safely distanced as they get to school. All of these issues we have been clear about for months, and these three education champions, Representative Davis, Vargas, and Peters, they listened months ago and they passed the HEROES Act 100 days ago that would provide the resources that we need to safely reopen our schools. And we have been waiting 100 days. And during that 100 days, let's be clear, and I appreciate the comments from Representative Peters, because students like Zach Patterson have been doing their job, making enormous sacrifice to adjust to a difficult situation. Parents like Mahogany Taylor have been doing their job to make sure in very, very difficult situations that students are able to learn at home. Teachers that Keisha Borden represents have been doing their job to make the biggest adjustment in their professional careers to make sure that our students can continue to learn. Franny Del Carmen, our principal at San Diego High School, has been doing her job getting this school completely ready, and her other colleagues in our other 200 schools around this city. Superintendent Martin has been doing her job to get this system ready to go, and while we've been distributing 58,000 computers and hooking students up to internet access and distributing 4 million meals, everybody in this community has been making the best of a very difficult situation because it's what our kids need. And we've been waiting 100 days for Mitch McConnell and Donald Trump to do their jobs. And we cannot continue to wait. And let's be clear, this is not just an issue about this year. When we see the decline in state revenues that make up 80% of funding for public education, and we think about what this is going to look like the next year and the year after if the federal government doesn't step up, we have already seen 500,000 educators in this country lose their jobs. We are looking at over 500,000 educators in the state of California alone that could be losing their jobs going forward. And what does that mean for our students? The federal government has to act. It is entirely possible for them to do the right thing, pass the HEROES Act, and let all of us continue to move forward, not just in San Diego, but around the country. And I want to now introduce our incredible elected student board representative from University City High School, Zachary Patterson.
Thank you, Board Vice President Barrera. Good morning. My name is Zachary Patterson, and I am the student trustee on the San Diego Board of Education. In my role, I am honored to serve as a representative to over 100,000 students that attend our district. 100,000 students with real lives that need our assistance to learn, to grow, and to become the society of tomorrow. Since the beginning of this current pandemic, the effects on education have been drastic and have hurt us as students. I have experienced my classroom fall away, contact with my friends dissipate, and like everyone, a completely transformed life that required me to take on new roles in my household and beyond. However, through all of this, I have chosen to stay optimistic, believing that my own government would support every student, would make sure that students have the resources necessary to continue to learn and to grow. And yet last week, I sat on a call with my superintendent asking how we could cut something to supplement the expiring food waivers that will feed our students on weekends and holidays. And while this was resolved at the very last minute, I thought about how embarrassing this was, that I have to fight for something like this. This should be a baseline already. The very basic and essential pieces of our education system are being torn out from under us. I want to believe in a future for every single one of our students and for me. An education system where we are continuing to close our achievement gap and we are fulfilling our mission that all students gain the skills, motivation, and curiosity to succeed. But we can't do that when we use our students like me as a bargaining chip. We are in a crisis. We are at risk of losing the students that need us most. And for the sake of my future and the future of the millions of students in this nation, we must do better. The HEROES Act, passed by the House of Representatives, laid out a clear message that we will support our schools, our students, and our future in whatever state of reopening we are currently in. Mr. President, Senate Majority Leader McConnell, I want you to hear loud and clear that San Diego Unified is committed to reopening as soon as possible. We know best that our students need to be in school to restart our economy and to ensure the promise of a high-quality public education for every student. And we will do just that when it is safe. Currently, we are listening to our scientists and health professionals, and the moment we get the thumbs up, our doors will be wide open again. But we need your help to pass the HEROES Act, ensuring federal funding to keep our schools functioning and our students thriving. We can't reopen fully and continue our reopening until we receive the very funding that is being withheld. And it's easy to forget the extensive costs that are associated with everything we must do currently. Funding a robust online learning program, buying PPE for when we return, cleaning classrooms extensively, and ensuring a socially distanced environment, just to name a few. On top of this, we as a school district have an added responsibility to ensure our students have everything at home that they would normally have in a school environment. This means writing materials, laptops, and textbooks. The costs are continuing to increase and further remind us of the need of our government to meet public schools halfway to ensure that we continue our education system. Our nation is ready to move forward, and that includes our students. Every one of us has the ability to succeed if we are given the resources to do so. Many states have done what they can. It is time for the federal government to uphold our nation's education system. Education is our foundation. If we can move through this pandemic and fund our schools like our future relies on it, because it does, then we can get through this. And most importantly, our students like me can get through this. On behalf of the 100,000 students that make up San Diego Unified, I am proud to demand the passage of the HEROES Act. Let's fight for our students together. I would now like to introduce to you the president of the San Diego Education Association, Keisha Borden.
Thank you, Zach. My name is Keisha Borden. I've been a teacher here in San Diego for over 20 years. As president of the San Diego Education Association, I represent 6,500 educators and support professionals that work directly with the 100,000 students in San Diego Unified. I'm here to demand that our representatives in Washington, D.C. support the HEROES Act. It is past time for Mitch McConnell and the rest of the Senate to step up and do the right thing for our students and our educators by allocating resources to our states and local governments. Specifically, the Senate must support this $3 trillion HEROES Act. We have seen Congress already allocate trillions of dollars to corporations, to banks, to the market, without much of the discussion or the hand-wringing that we're seeing around supporting the HEROES Act. In San Diego Unified, the digital divide has always existed. Sadly, this divide has been magnified during this COVID crisis, and it has had a very clear and direct impact on access to education for our students. Nowhere is that more evident in the fact that once schools closed back in March, more than 50,000 Chromebook computers had to be distributed to our students. Even with those computers, many of our families had difficulties accessing broadband service. Now that online learning has started once again, even more devices have been distributed to our students. But there are still students and families who do not have access to broadband service. The HEROES Act would provide $1.5 billion to close that digital divide by providing funds to help schools and libraries connect students and their patrons to the internet and provide them with internet-connected devices. Our CSCA colleagues served millions of meals to our students over the past few months, but we know many of our families are still struggling. The extended unemployment insurance and housing and food supports contained in the HEROES Act will go a long way in supporting our struggling families. Our schools were already facing a deficit before the COVID crisis. Response to the crisis has added millions in additional expenses. And now, in order to return to school safely, our schools must make another huge financial investment. In order to open safely, our schools must have deep cleaning and continuous cleaning of all learning environments. There must be accommodations to allow for social distancing. There must be daily health assessments when entering campus. Students and school employees need sufficient PPE. We must have nurses and medically trained personnel to assist and monitor student and employee health in collaboration with our county health departments. And the mental health counseling and some emotional support by trained counselors for our students and staff in the school community who have been deeply affected by the trauma brought in by this crisis. All of these additional supports and protocols require additional funding that our schools simply do not have and did not budget for. I call on our elected officials to do what is right and pass the HEROES Act to support our workers and our students and their families. We know that getting our kids back to school safely is a necessary part of getting our families back to work. But we are not going to put the health and safety of our teachers and our school staff at risk. We cannot open schools without significant support from the federal government. Again, I call on Senator McConnell and his colleagues to make public education, our students, and our educators a priority and pass the HEROES Act. I'd like to introduce our next speaker, President of the San Diego Unified Council of PTAs, Ms. Mahogany Taylor.
Good morning. The San Diego Unified Council of PTAs is proud. Good morning. The San Diego Council of PTAs is proud to lend our support and voices in advocating for increased federal funding for schools and states. Federal funding is needed to ensure students and educators have a safe and successful school year. The school year is underway. Our children and families need to know that it will not be cut short due to lack of funding. Districts have spent millions of dollars to provide students with protective equipment, computers, hotspots, and other student supplies. The state of California has provided funding, but a portion of the funds are deferred. Schools will not receive these funds unless the Senate and the federal government include financial support for states. PTAs across the nation are asking the Senate to pass the HEROES Act. This funding is essential to addressing critical needs to reopen schools safely and serve all students throughout this academic year. We recognize the devastation facing state and local economies. As schools continue to open, families living at or near poverty and students with disabilities will need significant support. PTA is asking Congress to provide additional funding for the Individuals with Disability Education Act and Title I to help schools districts address the complex needs of students under these programs. States and school districts need funding to support family engagement centers. There are many families that are essential workers, frontline medical providers, and do not have the ability to work from home. There are families that do not speak English or have reliable internet. As families continue to be their child's primary in-person support while virtual learning happens, they need our support. PTA remains committed to advocating to safeguard the health and safety of our children and make sure students, families, and schools have what they need during these challenging times. And I'd like to bring back Congresswoman Susan Davis. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I want to thank our presenters because I think they presented from the work that they're doing, from their professionalism, so many points that are just absolutely critical to this discussion. And now I want to open it up and see if there are any questions out there, and we have a number of people who might be able to respond. Thank you. Oh, absolutely. Gabriel, please come on up.
Good morning, esteemed colleagues, co-workers, members of the press, Congress. There's a lot of people here, and I want to remind everyone that this is a subject that's going to affect a lot of people. You can throw out numbers and you can say 100,000 kids. You can say tens of millions of people in California, second largest school district. At the end of the day, these kids go home to a specific house, and that may be children of a fireman, children of a police officer. It affects the entire community. My name is Gabriel Wessel. I'm here from California School Employees Association, which is our classified staff. I'm trying to shed a light from people that never left, people that never got shut down. We were deemed essential workers. And it's not the first time. Whenever there's wildfires or anything that's a major disaster, major thing that needs first responder personnel, we're deemed to do specific tasks like bring food, bring shelter, do the response, get started for our online educational platform. These are our freezer workers, our multiple warehouses, our distribution staff. There's a lot of things to address here, and it's not a small scale issue, and I don't want to put this on one party or the other party or make it a political debate, because if you look at a hockey puck and people are throwing it back and forth, that hockey puck is going to get beat up along the way, and that's not what we're here for. We're here to address that this is a large-scale issue that affects everyone involved. It doesn't discriminate whether you're a certain creed, religion, race, background, or social class. This is something that is needed, and the leadership is needed on multiple levels. Whenever you have a large, complex issue, you have to get with colleagues. You can't stand and point the finger from one place to another. We stand together and we work on common goals. This is about the children. This is about education. This is about public education that cannot be further cut and thrown by the wayside. We're asking for your help collectively to address an issue that's very near and dear to a lot of people. Our most vulnerable people are the children. We deliver bus passes for homeless children that are our students. There's a lot of kids that depend on those meals that we distribute. When you see one of those trucks and it has 4 numbers on it and people don't really pay attention to it, that's our distribution staff moving food. That may be the only meal that family gets. And I'm just here to remind you of things that are very complex, very broad scale, that need attention of a lot of different people to get this right the first time. We're not going to get multiple chances to get this done, and we're asking for your help now to address the funding that the schools need to reopen to do this right the first time. This isn't something that we can get wrong. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much for that. And I'll turn to questions.
Yes.
So just specifically, could you outline exactly how dire the situation can get for the school district if this money is not in time, essentially? Is the district at all saving any money without operational costs if buildings are closed? Can you kind of paint that picture for us about why specifically the federal money is being used?
The clock is ticking. We all know the precipice that we're on the edge of at this point. When we see across the country, here in our city and California and across the country, how the funding is cut because the revenues are down. So we know in the future what we're going to be facing. One of our colleagues said millions of people are going to be affected in terms of their jobs and being able to retain adequate staffing. Counseling services, nursing services, physical changes in the building, and the kinds of costs that we're experiencing, $30 million alone to shift to online learning in the spring. Now to continue that online learning as we open our schools now costs money. The costs in terms of the software licenses, additional computers. We had distributed 53,000 computers up through the spring. Now we're up to 75,000 computers. Wi-Fi hotspots. We're finding more families that in the spring didn't need that. They need that now. We have low-income families have turned into no-income families. Additional supports are needed now to keep this online going. So there's money we're spending for this more robust online learning experience, money that we're spending to make that work, and then money that we need to spend for the physical reopening, retrofitting our classrooms, the filters that are going to be needed in filtration systems, the PPE, as we've all been talking about. We've authorized $11 million already in personal protective equipment to be ready for that physical reopening. So we got to do both things. Invest in the online learning, money being spent right now, money already spent, more money being spent, and then money being spent for that physical reopening.
And then specifically, the HEROES Act versus obviously what the Senate was trying to come up with the HEROES Act. Why is the district kind of tying their wagon, hitching their wagon to the HEROES Act specifically? Would the district be content if it's the HEALS Act instead that is passed with federal money resources as well?
The HEROES Act clearly lines out what's necessary for public schools across the country. This is a national emergency and requires that national response, and the thought that went into the HEROES Act, they really understood the issues of what's necessary for the full funding of all schools across the country to get through this pandemic in a way that does not solve these budget problems on the backs of our kids. We need this funding and this investment now. Our goal all along has been health and safety and letting science guide the way. That's why we published our report with UCSD scientists. I'm very grateful for the partnership with Chancellor Pradeep Khosla and the UCSD scientists that showed us our path forward to a safe reopening. When we closed on March 13th, it was because of safety and the health and science leading the way in our decision making. These are tough decisions. So to open, we need to follow those same safety, health guidelines by the scientists. The scientists show us the path forward, and it's an old expression, you go slow to go fast. We wanted to have every step of the way towards reopening to be the safe step forward. That's why our phase 1 that we just started to talk about recently is to do it very safely. Appointment-based, teachers understanding best where the learning loss is occurring and giving students those in-person opportunities in the safest way possible. And who determines safest way possible? The doctors, the physicians, the epidemiologists, the virologists, the infectious disease specialists, the people that understand the airborne aspect of this virus. They are guiding us and showing us how to effectively and safely, carefully, gradually open our schools so that every step forward is a solid step forward and not slipping backwards.
And as a follow-up, the money from the CARES Act typically received PPE has been mentioned as one of the main, resources that money will be allocated towards. But in San Diego specifically, there's a lot of ESL students, English second language, or second language programs. Will there be money going towards those students who are struggling right now, learning English or a second language in general?
From day one of this pandemic, all of our decisions have been focused on how do we make sure that equity is at the center of this. And when we say equity, we talk about students most in need getting the most amount of support. And so when we talk about English learners, what are they needing to be able to thrive and keep their learning going forward? We've been very clear on learning loss from the very start of this pandemic. Our advocacy at the state and federal level has been to address the students most in need, are going to be most affected by this, and English learners are in there. Mm-hmm. We keep going forward every step of the way with the funding that we have. We have this phase 1 that we're in right now, and going each step of the way, we know the precipice that we're on where when the funding's not there, we will have to stop. We will have to slow down or impact the quality of the reopening. When you reopen and you can't put appropriate nursing and counseling and distancing in place and physical changes that need to happen, you slow it down and you don't do it as safely. All I can say is it's urgent for action to happen now, because this is not just San Diego Unified, across the country, we as superintendents and district leaders and boards of education have to make budget decisions today for weeks and months ahead, and we need to be able to see and plan for the physical reopening of our schools. And it can't be something that happens at the last minute. Planning is necessary for it to be safe, and you can't plan without the adequate funding. You don't get to do the kinds of plans that will really make a strong opening if you don't know what's in your budget.
Any other questions? Okay, great. Thank you all.
Thanks, everybody.
No bueno.
Poquito.
I speak Spanish.
Oh, yeah.
Right here. Right here.